So first of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. As always, we're super glad to see so many people participating, and I feel like people are getting more and more Zoom sick, or at least I feel like that. I really like those interactive things, so we're really happy to be having you here at the later hour. And today we have Thomas Struttmann with us. He's more than 30 years of experience in leading projects, M&A, due diligence, just a whole bunch of cool things he's been involved in over his career. And I think he can maybe speak a little bit about that himself and give us a short intro of what he's been doing in his career. Today he's going to talk about planning and forecasting analytics in mining. I think a really interesting topic, especially nowadays with a lot of the buzzwords around big data, AI, machine learning becoming more and more relevant, and mining companies realizing that a lot of the data they already collected is just sitting there and not being really utilized to the full potential. So I think a really relevant topic, and super glad Tom could make it virtually. And the floor is yours, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lucas, for the introduction. I'd like to share a few slides. And so as I go through this presentation, I would like to, I'll pause at certain points to try to get some questions. So we've blocked ourselves out for an hour. I'll try to go through this in a little less time than that, maybe 40 minutes or so. But I want to get as many questions from the audience as possible to understand what's on your mind and answer questions. If it's not related to this topic, you can still ask the question and I'll see what I can do to answer it. But let me share some slides. So let's see. Here we go. Yeah.
I just gave you permission. I think I didn't have it.
Yeah, okay. Right, so you can see the desktop here. If I open this up, I may have to change it, but looks like it's going okay. So I wanted Dr. Enders asked me if I would speak. I'm part of the Industry Advisory Council at CSM, and I've been involved in that for about 7 years. I was invited by Dr. Nelson initially, and then have worked in the team, and now I'm leading the executive team of the Industry Advisory Council today. And something that's been very interesting to me personally, and you'll see with my background, is this whole thing of planning and forecasting and the complications of it. And it's very interesting to me because that understanding this and being able to execute on it has a very huge impact on the financial performance of the business. And in fact, that's really the main purpose of the business, is to make money and generate capital and returns. Obviously, it's putting minerals together for people, but it all runs around economics. And there's a huge intersection with mining and finance, I'm sure you all are aware of. So just a quick one here. I didn't start out in mining. I started out as a civil engineer and worked for Caterpillar for about 24 years. And through that time, I did a number of projects, but my sales territories were largely mining. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in the mining boom in the 80s in Nevada when heap leaching was just coming online. So I quickly learned about the importance of productivity and the other metrics that miners work for, and the impact of service and products and support. And after that, I left and started my own consulting practice. And the reason I did that was because I saw a lot of inefficiencies in the way that assets are deployed and delivered. And with that, I did a number of consulting projects, with many companies. You can see some on the list here, but all over the world. And every place I went, it was all about, how do we improve the business? What can we do to change this, uplift our capabilities? And it always intersected with finance and planning. And so after a big project in Africa, I came back to the US and was found by a software company called Alight, which is a planning, forecasting, analytics platform that was created about 10 years ago. We renamed the company a few years ago called Revos. And they asked me to come on board to build a platform for mining, which I've been doing for the last 4.5 years. So it's quite exciting. So you can just want to set that context because of the background experience. It shows that if you have the right intellect, knowledge, talent, interest, curiosity, you can go in many different directions. And I very impressed with the programs at CSM, and I believe you'll have that opportunity yourself. So today we're just going to talk about forecasting, planning, and analytics, and I want to illustrate that this is something that happens in every mining firm, and it's very important because it sets up the plans. It allows the board of directors to understand where the company's headed, and then they set up a operating budget. And the high performing mining firms that I work with have an awful lot of, they run lots of scenarios looking at different cases against different situations to come up with the best outcomes possible for the plan. And then the plan obviously changes, so it needs to get updated and reforecast again, but it's very important. But building a plan is a pretty arduous task for most firms today until they employ a technology, and you've got people from environment, commercial finance, geology, people in culture, supply chain professionals, technical people. So while you're building the mine plan, and as a mining engineer, you're creating what the physical movements are and the economics, but there are many other players involved in that in terms of understanding the impact to the company. So we do know the mine planning softwares can get you to a cost per ton basis or some other margins, but there are many other downstream things that happen afterwards. So today is about learning how to apply modern technology to so people can, have the power to realize the full optimal financial performance of the business. So the objectives for today's session, just to get a grasp of the planning and forecasting activities in a mining firm. Many of you have some experience with that, but just to kind of level set with that, understanding how applying technology can improve these processes of planning. And then, the use of scenario analysis and decision-making helping mining firms unlock value. And when you start your career and you are able to go and make a case for that, I've did this, I've added value here, I've added value there, it allows you to get recognized and to move to higher levels of responsibility if that's what you choose to do. And then I'll show a few examples of how a mining engineer can directly get involved in shaping the direction of the company in terms of its financial performance. So just to start, this is one of my consulting projects. It's a Freeport Macmoran Grasberg mine over in Papua New Guinea. It's on the equator. It's probably one of the most interesting places I've ever worked. And for me, I worked on a supply chain project, which was really about helping the efficiency of the performance of the mining operating side. So the trucks, the dozers, the repair systems, supply chain, et cetera, all those things. But I wanted to just lay this in front of you because it's a very complex value chain here at Freeport Grasberg. They've got open pit, underground. There's a big processing matrix, and then smelting and transport. So all those things are part of what we call the value chain of mining. And at Revos, we look at it this way, where we have value chains for each specific area. So mining value chain, processing, transportation, all the way to market to the customer, depending on the commodity that you have. And so it's about running predictive scenarios, and you get financial outcomes, and it's also used for continuous improvement. So it's got a lot of capabilities. So I'm going to show a few slides about the company, but we're one of the pioneers in continuous value chain management, cloud applications. So everything's in the cloud. A few years ago, when we were getting started in mining, there was a lot of concern about, can you do it in the cloud? And we have the security, do you have the connectivity? And that's completely changed over the last 3 years, where a lot of firms have their data in the cloud because of security. But the idea is you get the power of cloud computing. We've been successful helping companies achieve some very good outcomes, whether it's understanding the NPV for a global mining company. We actually worked on the project for Anglo American to help them with their Quellaveco project to understand what systems to use, which size trucks, autonomy, all those different things, maintenance strategies, et cetera. So what happens in a mining firm today is you've got a lot of people involved in the decision making that takes place, all the way from the C-suite, where they're really worried about hitting guidance, but then you've got finance teams, you've got ops teams, you've got people doing strategy, people running innovation programs, and all those people have objectives, projects that they want to value in the understand the impacts of that. So A lot of companies are doing digital projects. You know, the CEO is really worried about meeting his earnings guidance because he's managing a public company. So he needs to be able to rapidly and quickly see the impact of different assumptions and financial outcomes. And they're also looking at the risks of the operating plan. But the important thing is that everybody now with an application like Revos can have the full rendering of the business as it's structured through all its value chains in one place. And so any impact that's being made is measured accurately about the impact of the business. And the way systems work today, it's very complex. There's lots of spreadsheets. There's lots of people with their own version of what the business looks like. These spreadsheets, many times people leave the company and go on to a new job, and it's kind of what he had. They're loaded with errors. Sometimes they're easy to find, other times not. But big decisions are being made, and it's very cumbersome. So to put together a plan, one of our customers that we're working with now, they typically do a planning process that takes at least 3.5 to 4 months of doing all the physicals and then loading all the rest of the data and then making decisions. And they always, up until now, have always gotten down to the last minute, like the plan's due on Friday, so I don't have time to run any more scenarios. So they just end up with a result. So this is the way the world looks today. And we solve that by taking the information and putting it into our application that reflects the business of the value chains. And there's lots of data that comes in. The mine plan physicals, your actuals coming through, your mill feed, things around maintenance planning, et cetera. So all those inputs go in, and people can run lots of scenarios to create a baseline, look for ideas for optimization. And all this comes out in financial metrics, right? So that's how the companies measure their performance, or free cash flow, your cost per ton, all-in sustaining costs, benchmark. So in the context of one of our customers, and I'll show you a few slides in a minute, they use this to produce their life of mine plan, their budget, their short range forecast, but they're also using it for site cost reporting. And they're using that so they can track where they're headed, what the variances are associated with what their plans are. But at the same time, they're able to run scenarios to figure out where they go next to hit their targets, because everyone's focusing on a big target. So some of the impacts from a customer, this customer that we're working with is one of the larger mid-tier players in Australia. They've got 6 different mine sites. They have really decided that financial discipline is core to the success of the business, because they're making investments in different projects. They need to understand where to turn the production up, where to turn it down. And they're really not trying to become the biggest gold mining company in the world, but they want to deliver the most value. So they're constantly looking at scenarios, and they want to have the people on site acting like owners. So they needed technology to be able to do that. And so this is what they were looking for, was an application we call robust planning for continuous forecasting to manage the future. So some of the success criteria that we have established at the beginning of the project and built on it as we've gone through it is really that you have a standard planning model. So where the site is today, they're measuring things a bit differently, but when their application is fully implemented, they'll have a common view of how the business is configured and how the business is understood from a financial perspective. So it was important to them because they realize that there's big differences in the way things are looked at the site level, but when it all rolls up, they have to be able to deliver on the earnings targets. So financial visibility was important, but more importantly, people saying, I own that forecast, not the guy in finance. I'm running the mine. I'm running the underground part of the mine. I own that value chain. I want to understand, when I'm making these decisions for my mine plan, what's the impact to the company, and how is that going to roll back up to all-in sustaining costs? Because those are the big targets. And that allows it to do that, but also collaborate across the group, between sites and within the department, because there's a lot of smart people at the mines with very specific understanding of the value chain of their specific area, whether it's geology or mining or processing, but they all relate to each other and one impacts the other. So it allows for also for continuous scenario analytics. And this is an example. So this is the customer that we're working with in Australia. So they've got a large open pit with a future underground at Cowell, very big mine. One that's got gravity, another one in Queensland, underground mine only. This one's very complex. There's small pits. They've got about 14 different pits, and they've got an underground operation, high grade and lots of ounce production. And then a new one was purchased since we started the project, which is Red Lake up in Canada. So all these have different unique elements of the value chain here, mining, processing, maintenance, labor, et cetera. And so we were hired to help put together this platform. So as a configuration for each of these following similar structures that will roll up to a corporate application. So let me just pause for a second and see if there's any questions. I've been talking for about 15 minutes already. Lucas, any questions from your end? Anything on the chat?
Don't see anything in the chat yet. But if something comes up, I'll let you know.
Yeah, okay, all right. So does this give people have a sense for planning? I mean, where are people, and have they gone through mine site training? Have people started into their capstone? Have they done a capstone? Okay. I'm not on mute, right?
No, you're not. I think it's probably the
all right. So let me go through some capabilities, and then I'm going to show you the application. I think that'll be more interesting, but this just gives you an idea of the depth and breadth of the value chain. So the application can be configured all the way down to a maintenance level where you've got some maintenance planning activities that take place that have a big impact on the cost. We produce the full financials, balance sheet, cash flow. We can run scenario analytics. We'll go through a couple examples, but here you can make assumptions around changes to this and see the impact. In this case, we're looking at the cost per ton as an OpEx expense by making some changes to your recoveries, powder factor, spacing, and grinding assumptions. So that shows you the impacts between your base plan versus your change in your other scenario that you would run. So immediately you can see the impact, and you can also see the relationships between the expenses that happen and the cost and where those are related. It's very easy to share scenarios. So, there's different permission levels, whether you're an owner, that means you have the highest privileges, or you have you can share it with different people, and then they can make their own scenarios, or they can see that, and then they can see what changes they can be making when you share it. So that's very helpful when you're creating a forecast and a budget. It's very useful for collaboration. We have commentary panels in the application where after a certain period, you want to understand, like if you're looking at the site cost report, it would say what happened previously, what are the differences. And so the big commentary is all right here in the application. So as executives look at the specifics on where you were, where you're going, you're able to look at, visually see it, and also have the commentary around it. And then all the changes get tracked in the applications, which is really important because when you have a lot of people working on things, you need to know they're all timestamped so you can see what it was before you did it, what it is, after, and then what it is currently. So this has to do with carbon regeneration in this example from a metallurgy perspective. So when those variables change, you can see that. It also allows you to look at different projects, depending on what role you have in a mining company. You may be on an innovation team, and it's important to understand, where these technologies fit, how much capital is required, how many years to break even, what's the NPV. So this is used to help prioritize and sequence projects, and we can move those forward or backward in the application and immediately see the impacts to your cash flow. So that helps with sequencing. So sometimes you may you have a project that's going to give you the most NPV and the most free cash flow, but you don't have enough capital. So you have to be able to see the impacts of reality when you can sequence it. But this saves time putting that kind of thing together. It's also used for continuous improvement. So these are different continuous improvement programs that can be implemented, and each of those will have an impact to the cost. And again, if you're, depending on where you are in the mining firm, you have impact around the business. And so companies are always driving for improvements, but it's very difficult to see the impact to the business. And this is just down to a cost per ton level, but we can show you the same thing to a all-in sustaining cost. So here, there's a lot of companies are moving to autonomy. Lots of new projects at BHP are coming online the next year. Newmont just put a program together at Boddington in Australia. It's going to be autonomous, and that's getting launched in the next few weeks. So a lot of companies are spending the investment to automate the mines for different reasons, but each one has different cases associated with the size of the mine, the size of the trucks, different fuel types and things like that will impact the cost. So when they put up the capital to put in an autonomous system, they want to run a lot of scenarios to determine the effectiveness of it and understand the risk associated with it.
Hey, Tom, we had a question from Gowan. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah.
See that in the chat, or you can also read it.
I didn't see it, but
the question was about how do you account for uncertainty in forward-looking models? If you do, how is uncertainty incorporated in that?
Yeah, so I think that's sort of the uncertainty dimension. What would, let's unpack that a bit. What do you mean by uncertainty of what?
It doesn't specify in the question. Gowan, do you want to talk to that a bit? If you can, feel free to join me.
There's different, so let's just talk about uncertainty. So there could be uncertainty about the commodity price, right? Probably not the biggest one, you have uncertainty, but there could be uncertainty around the ore body. Is the ore there? Is the ore not there? There can be uncertainty about the ability to operate. How reliable is your fleet going to be? So you're trying to understand what those risk parameters are as you look at when you do your forecast. And so some of the inputs for that uncertainty can come through, from the mine planning software, or from the geological model can tell you the uncertainty or the range of certainty associated with that. And then that spits up what I would call a production profile associated with that specific case. And then we can run that through and value that.
I think Gowan was specifically asking for mathematical techniques employed. Maybe if you have an example for that, you can go into.
That's about as far as I would describe it at this point. The mathematical techniques to describe uncertainty would be in other softwares that would feed into Revos, like a mine planning software or a geological modeling software. In this specific case, we can do that. It's on our roadmap, but it's not something that we're currently doing. And the reason is there's a lot more low-hanging fruit that needs to be dealt with before that is really important. Another question?
I think that was all for now. Thanks.
Okay. All right, sure, thank you. So the other thing is there's a lot of graphics that are in the application, so you can see, you can immediately see the impact of your, so this is cost per ton as an example, or you can look at productivity rates and cost per ton. But lots of flexibility, and you can see the relationship with this over time as this moves across. So let me shift gears. I'm going to go to demonstrate the application for you. Let's see, sharing. So I'm going to log into the application. Can everyone see my screen yet? Is it there, Lucas? I can't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So as I mentioned, everything is cloud-based. So when you log in, this is what you see. And I'm going to take you through a demo. This just illustrates, some of the graphics that you have. It can be obviously anywhere on any device. Here's your desktop. You can have it on your iPad. You can have it on your phone, but you can see all the same information from many different aspects of it. It also allows you to see the history and also provide administrative privileges depending on your setup. So when you come in, I'm going to start with a couple. These are folders. So these folders have different dashboards inside each folder, and they can be set up by category. And then there's a value chain down below that takes into account all the aspects of the business, the way it's designed. But let me just start with a couple examples here. So I mentioned, so let's go to the corporate slide for a second. So these guys are really, they're very busy, but they're really under a lot of pressure, as you would expect, to hit targets, because the shareholders, need to understand that if they invest in this company, they're going to get this kind of result. So let me start with a baseline plan. So let me just describe a few things. So I'll pull this over. Hang on for a second. So this window right here allows you to look at any scenario, and there's no limit to how many scenarios you can be looking at, but you usually want to look at a couple at a time. And the scenario is about the data, right? So each scenario has its own unique set of data. And when you make changes to that data, then you can do a scenario comparison to see what had changed. And this, you can look at it from different time frames. So this one, we're just looking at 3 months plus 9, the forecast. And that allows you, so any scenario can be matched with any time horizon. So when you set a scenario, you have a different set of cases. You can look at it for, well, how does it impact the budget? But then how does it impact the business over time? So these are just a few dashboards that are set up from an executive perspective. And you can see I've got things that are important, your monthly free cash flow, and then your cumulative cash flow. Here you can see your all-in sustaining cost per ounce. And here they've established a target of $900 is what they're expecting for that target for that time period. And then you can see by month where they are. And then you can look at your cost per ton, tons moved over time against your production rates. And again, so just there, any data in the system can be manipulated and presented into a dashboard. And dashboards are used to help with decision making because you can see things pretty quickly. So here's your base mine plan. And I'm just going to say, all right, I'm going to take the alternate mine plan. This data is already in here. I'll go through a small example to show you how it changes. And so here they can compare different plans. And this shows your alternate mine plan has less free cash flow than the base plan. So for different reasons, those shows you the financial impacts of these two different plans. But it's got lower, it has a little bit lower cost in these different time periods, but higher cost over here. So there must have been, that other plan must have some capital set up in it. So, and then you can see the different impacts against recovery and grades and rates. So let me go over to the chief financial officer. So this job is a pretty high pressure job because he's the one that's in front of the market that says, all right, our company is going to hit these targets. So invest in our company. And he has to work with raise money, he has to pay off debt, he has to get debt. It's a very difficult job. And so for him to be successful, he needs the operating teams to be delivering on their goals. And when they deliver on the goals, then the company can get their goals. But he also has to be careful about how he allocates capital for these teams to be able to execute on their programs, because he has the whole view of the business in his hand, and he has to be able to have a team that can actually execute on it. So he might be interested in running some scenarios. And here's a scenario where we said, well, what happens if the gold price increases? Well, that's not so interesting. It's probably, I'm going to obviously have more revenue. But while gold prices are increasing, it could be because there's inflation. And if there's inflation, we've got our fuel price, we assume the fuel price went up, but our power price went down. So what is the net impact of all that? Well, the way you can measure that at EBITDA margins, we're measuring it over here in terms of free cash flow, which is how much money is left over after capital expenditures. Or you can look at your all-in sustaining costs. And so while we raise the price, that's interesting, but I have a higher all-in sustaining costs. Well, what happened? The fuel price went up, but our margins went up. So our free cash flow increased because we have a higher price. So it's important to be able to see what those impacts are, because things are changing constantly in a mining company, and being able to see that is really important for the chief financial officer. Well, the chief operating officer has a little bit different view of the world. He needs to make sure that the tons show up and that the ounces show up. This is a gold company. That your ounces are delivered, and he's got teams that are saying, I need to spend capital for this, I need to spend capital for that. Or he's challenged teams like, we need to lower our AISC. How are we going to do that? So let's just start with the base mine plan and say, well, how would we measure the impact of these things? So this is your base plan, and it's going to deliver your all-in sustaining costs at these different metrics in these time periods based on the mine plan. But the teams have implemented a number of continuous improvement programs, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll show you that there's a consolidated list that are all in the system. So I'm going to have a program for automated drills. I may have a program for automated trucks. So what is the impact to my against my base mine plan? So this says, you can see the red is the new plan for when you put all the programs together, and you dropped it from 922 to 902. So it shows a positive impact, but in other months it has a higher impact. And that is because some of these programs require capital expenditures. So there's a lot of moving parts in the mining business, and being able to understand the impacts of that's very important to get the right programs in place at the right time. And also for the company to be able to achieve their targets. So let's just see. I think that was the one, operating scenarios, the operational scenarios. Yeah. So that's what it looks like from a chief operating officer. But if you're in the mining team, there's different things that you're worried about. And here again, as I said, any of these views, these are different configurations of the same data. So I'm going to go back to the base mine plan. Right. So here you're looking at different production rates, and measuring against all your sustaining costs. So you're able to see the impact of your continuous improvement programs, or say if you put in autonomous trucks, what would be the impact of that in this case? And again, the assumptions are built into the system, but the assumptions, the changes that you would make for an autonomous truck have to do with utilization, which is a big impact. It can be as much as 15% more utilization. There's also throughput. Then there's cost associated with that. And then you have capital, and you have your run time and run fees. And so all those things are considered in running this scenario. So, that's kind of what I had to talk about today from this perspective. I just like to toss it out to the group to see if there's any questions that people have about forecasting analytics, questions about why it's important, how you use it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. I think we have one question from Liam. He was asking what Revos is providing beyond the software. Are you doing consulting, advising past what is just using the software?
Yeah, well, a number of us come from consulting backgrounds, and myself particularly, where you've worked with lots of different mining firms to help them unlock value. we do deliver services like that through partners. So like some of the bigger partners, like the big 5 accounting companies that do have big mining practices, or have a big technology practice that do that. So they actually help on projects from a configuration standpoint. They very importantly help on change management, which is a major impact, and it's something hopefully you'll get some training on that at CSM, because that's such an important piece of any aspect of your work life. But being able to adopt technology and manage through the changes associated with that. So that's a really important dimension. So we do partner for the consulting aspect of it. So we're really a software company that delivers the applications and provides the underlying infrastructure behind this that allows the companies to run numbers often and run them very accurately.
Thanks, Tom. I think Priscilla had a question.
Sure. Tom, you know me and my questions.
Yeah.
So first of all, I have to say something that I was surprised that all CFOs are men. Don't use he, Tom.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There were two questions I had. One had to do with there's almost always bias in building assumptions and building scenarios. And I wondered, to what extent can your company provide those kinds of observations that will help when they're entering into decision-making with a bias?
Yeah, I mean, we have the data, we see the data that goes into it. We don't have a specific, we have benchmarking that can help understand bias. Like I'm saying, no, I'm going to put in the data for an autonomous truck and I'm going to get 98% utilization and 75 or 100% availability. We would know that those benchmarks really aren't valid. You're biasing it too much. And so we do have benchmarking data from our experience working with many customers. So we can provide that insight to them, but we don't have a specific, application within the application that does that. But yes, it's important to make sure that you remove the bias from all of your decisions. And that really is the people that are running that. Yeah.
Yeah. It might be interesting to think about the use of AI as these scenarios are getting built, to actually investigate what's being planned and what's being asked, and to really study and try to pull out these implicit biases that may be not benchmarkable, but may be embedded nonetheless, and help to keep problems in their boxes rather than open them up.
Yeah.
But the second thing I wanted to ask was, I fight this idea that mining is really, to a certain extent, outside. It's in an inward circle, and it's sort of outside of the circular economy, just kicking in new materials. Do you see your approach being something that could evolve into maybe looking at more downstream, so that, for example, we're talking about maybe useful use of tailings, so you change what's going on over time, and to be able to develop some scenarios that are not closed on the productivity and the net present value, but actually think about bringing up new innovations that are outside of the mining system?
Well, certainly we can do that. I mean, our sweet spot is really dealing with the operating teams and the financial leadership and the executive leadership. So they would be looking at strategies associated with that. So if it's someone that's leading the innovation team, they may say, well, look, we're going to try to evaluate. We got a project that we're spin up, and we want to see the impact of changing, of monetizing their tailings. They would want to understand that in the context of the rest of the business. So certainly we'd be able to put that together for them, so they could see what that would be. So it's almost like, I would think of it more like, I have a portfolio of 6 mines. I'm going to add 1 more mine. What does that mean? Or I have a portfolio of 7 assets. That new asset or capability is going to be realizing value for my tailings. So what capital has to go in what's the impact of that, and how does that impact production? I don't think it would be significant enough to impact the price of the commodity, but it would be more on the revenue realization from the business that's there. So we would help them with that. I would think that they would have a pretty good inkling to understand that, but then you could run different cases associated with that on how that fits with the business. So the whole thing of having your business built into one system allows you to see the full impact right away versus a set of different assumptions and spreadsheets that are disconnected or in other folks' mind that they can't see everything.
Yeah, so this is sort of like making the operations a digital mine, but to combine that with the other aspects of digitalization would be an interesting future.
It's a very big part of digitalization. I mean, today, people, it's amazing. We see this, we're currently seeing it in one of the projects that we're involved in now, but it's like the transformation of leaving the spreadsheets behind or the current systems and putting it into an application, because you can't, some of the finance teams are, used to being able to, change the numbers and to come up with the number they're trying to get to. And when you have things in an application that's tied down, you really have changed the rigor of the financial management of that business. And so, it's an important piece to when you have it in an application like an industrial, enterprise application, you're able to put more precision, more accuracy, and more efficiency around the business.
Tom, this is Kadri. I look at this screen like this, and it is in the periods that is 1 month long.
Yeah.
And how long into the future do you go?
There's no limitation. So I don't know what's in this demo file here, but we do, we can go out 40 years by year, and we can also look at it monthly, quarterly. So when you're doing the LOM, it's interesting. We've been able to put all that view into the same matrix, right? So you can do the life of mine, and then you're like, well, I got that. That's good. So I feel comfortable about the capital expenditures here, but now let's see what the budget looks like. And so you can collapse it all the way down to a monthly view or to a quarterly view, but there's no limitation. And you can see different time periods in each area. If this is set up for that right now, but it might be. Because people, and again, now you're looking at monthly and then quarterly and annually. This isn't the best rendering of that, but yes, we can see those different time periods and we have no limitation. So when you've been looking at some of your work, you would obviously be looking at the longer term views.
Right. Look at the 5-year and 10-year plans.
Yeah. Yeah. So when that's the project we have is set up the same way. So they look at 5-10 years of life of mine. Some of those mines only have 5 years left, or they may have 10 years left. And then it's, what are the mine plans in those different time periods, and what's the impact of that? So all that's used for that.
Yeah, this looks nice. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate that feedback. Yeah, I had some other stuff I wanted to show you, but I can't because it's customers' data. But it speaks more to the using it for short-range forecast, using it for analytics, and then it's driving that discipline down. So we have I think we showed you the commentary panel that was here for the CEO dashboard, but what we've created is a commentary panel for your business. So if you're running processing, it looks at your feed grade, and it looks at your consumables, your power consumption, throughput, recoveries, et cetera. So when those things are out of budget, people want to understand those impacts. And so you don't have to leave the application to be able to do that. It's all in one spot. So when I have that ready up, if I get another opportunity to come back, I'll be able to present that as well, to see how these pieces fit together.
Yeah, this is looking better and better every
Okay.
time I see a presentation from you.
Okay, yeah, we're working on it. There's all kinds of the other thing that since the first time we met you, there's a way to we can import and export data from the application. So you can export a I don't know what some of this one have to, probably a better value chain sheet, but the mining engineer doesn't have to go to anybody special. He can say, look, I need these variables coming out of mine site, or I have these variables coming out of Deswick. All right, those are drivers that feed the application. We do an export for that. They can see what values have to go in. They can have those values outputted from Deswick and then suck it into the application and immediately see the impacts and create a new scenario with a new mine plan within a matter of minutes. So, we really believe that having the tools in place for the miners, the mining engineers, and the management teams, leadership, to be able to use their brain power and let this drive the calculations for them so they can get more insights faster.
Got a couple of questions, Tom, if you would like to answer them. I can start you out with one from Gaon again. He was asking about, besides life of mine, he's asking about life of waste. So basically asking for the cost of unknown unknowns. How do you account for those? Or how do you help clients to understand them better? I guess refers to specifically also cost of tailings, waste.
Yeah, so you're talking about trying to be more efficient. Like waste can be time, waste can be productivity, waste can be pure, waste, like we bought too much material.
Yeah, I think the question was geared towards the long-term cost of those unknown costs that are not apparent at the start of a project, but come up over time, and how do you account for them in the models?
Yeah, so these would be, are you talking about like at the end of the life of mine where you're doing the reclamation? Or you're talking about environmental challenges that may happen that you couldn't understand before?
Yeah, I think Gaon referred to legal liabilities, basically, I guess more a risk-based approach again, looking at please Gaon, chime in if I'm getting your question wrong here, but.
Yeah, so I think the context there is you're looking at from an investment perspective. So when you've got, when you're talking about liabilities, you have to, there's a risk associated with that, right? So there's, how much risk is it there? Are you going to exceed that risk? And that's just going to be a cost that gets factored in, that gets as its own assumption, right? So there's a zero cost, there's a real high cost. That's how you would look at that. So you just add an element in the value chain sheet to say risk, and how am I going to quantify risk? I'm going to quantify risk in what areas is it going to be like? If it's liability, then that's going to impact your balance sheet or your net earnings, right? Or if it's an operating risk, it's going to affect your throughput, right? So I got these operating assumptions. I'm going to produce so many ounces in this time period, but I might miss it by 5%. What does that mean?
Yeah, I guess the question also kind of refers specifically to the length of basically those risks, right? For some risks, you might end up having to set aside potential funds way longer than the actual mine of life. I guess that's where the question gets at. Well,
there's bonds and things like that. So so you would take, the construct would be a life of mine financial model. And then the assumptions would be, or the cost expenses, you can call them line items, whatever you want, those would have numbers associated with them against different risk parameters. And then that would be computed into the result you'll be solving for is NPV, I would guess, or ultimately long, free cash flow. So that's how you would treat it. And that's an important question because, from an investment perspective, those are things that need to be modeled. Kadri could speak to that for his experience in, being on the boards of big companies, but, the risks have to be quantified and expressed in the same framework, right? Like, if it's this framework or if it's another one, you need to express it along with the operating information.
Sounds good. Let me know, Gaon, if that answers your question. We got another one from Dylan. He's asking about, are you able to make forecasts for cuts made in different locations and then integrate them and determine different scenarios for a particular mine? Cuts.
What does cuts mean?
I would assume cuts being different mining cuts? Maybe Dylan, can you unmute and specify that?
Yeah, just different areas in the mine, different places where there's something mineable.
Yeah, so we're doing that right now in the application that is for the client in Australia, because they've got 15 different mines that are treated individually. So we're forecasting at that level. So all the forecasting for mine A, B, C, D, E, I mean, I can't give you their names, but these different mines, we're they're producing their budget at that level so they can understand the cost associated with this one, and whether they turn on a heap leach or not, or whether they're mining in this area A, B, C, or D. Because each of those areas have different cost parameters, right? They're different, there's a different mine plan, there's different hauling, there's different equipment required, different hours input to it. So it's helping them achieve their growth strategy with, being selective about which properties to bring on at which time. When you mentioned the word cuts, you can also see the impact to changes in labor. If we have those very sophisticated labor model that's here as well. I'm not showing it to you now, but if you needed to make some headcount adjustments, you can see what those look like too. Or on the other hand, you're adding all these new pits. What's the impact going to be from a labor cost perspective? Which is a big part. It's it's like a third of the cost. It's huge. Good question.
There's another good question from Ian Loomis. He was asking for, so how do you deal with a mine that has 2 years of reserves and has had 2 years of reserves for the past 40 years? So basically.
Well, you need a bigger geology budget, exploration budget, I think. But I think it sounds like if it's that, it sounds like that, it sounds like it feels like it's an undercapitalized or underfunded property. So how would you deal with that? The question is, what you might think of as, try to get some more geological data to understand the full value of it. And then either figure out what capital and understand what capital is required to make that happen. Or start, put it in the sales process to figure out, how do I monetize it, right? So if you're capital constrained, I think that the way I would intuitively understand that happening is because you don't have enough money to invest in an effective resource exploration program.
Tom, this is Ian. Hello.
Yes.
This is Ian. Yeah, what I actually was intending to mean is one of these operations that may be in a jurisdiction where reserves are taxed. So then the reserves are not declared until you're actually ready to go mine them. Mm-hmm. So you end up with a long-term, a known long-term mine based on resource, but a short period of time based on reserve.
Yeah.
So does your model then account for the fact that you're going to vary your asset, whether it's a resource or a reserve?
Yes, it can. Those are the resources and reserves are all tied to different mine plans, right? So there's a set of physicals that would allow you to do that. If you can't display your, it's puzzling on how you would try to manage that business though, right? Because is it worth it to pay? You could model like, well, I'm going to pay the tax because I want to understand, I want to have more defined so I can raise more money, or I know what that is, but I don't report it. I'm not sure how sounds more like a jurisdictional challenge.
Maybe Chris can chime in there. He said he would want to add to that question. I'm not sure if that's still.
Hi there. Hi, Lucas and Tom. And Tom, we've met before, haven't spoken for a while. Just expanding on Ian's question, and then it's maybe beyond the scope of the software, but a similar situation that I've seen a large company offload a narrow vein underground mine because it had 3 years of reserves, and it's got nothing to do with the capital budget or anything like that. It's the geometry of the ore body, where they just cannot physically drill more than a couple of years ahead of themselves. And this company offloaded a narrow vein ore body, very very cheap, because the people involved in the business transaction didn't understand that pretty simple mining problem that we quite often deal with in underground mines, particularly narrow. And maybe it's just beyond the scope of the software, but it does pose a problem that people make decisions based on what they see in a spreadsheet and don't understand what's really going on.
Well, I think that's like I would say, Chris, that's like a scenario that you want to run in the application. I mean, we do have an underground configuration that's, because of, the projects that we've done. So you would look at you would make some assumptions like, I have a strong belief. I can't actually prove it because I can't drill it out, but I have a lot of confidence that it's going to be there. So, what is it worth to exploit it? And then take that information into account and run scenarios around the different cases that may happen from that. Does that make sense, or does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. My son's sharing my office at the moment, so there's a bit of music in the background. But yeah, I think it does, and it is a problem that we have as far as trying to bridge that gap. And I understand that the scenario analysis, it's just, I guess my concern is this: the way it's presented, a CFO, a CEO would look at certain data and make a decision without realizing some of those potential scenarios, which really at the end require speaking to the geologist, speaking to the engineer to say, hey, what could really happen, even though it's not a declared resource, and notwithstanding the concern Ian raised with regards to certain jurisdictions holding reserves because of taxation issues.
So it's an important point, right? So the idea is that this is putting, that you have the rendering of the business in the application. So there's no limitation on how many scenarios you can run. And if I was the geologist, I would say, look, this is my hypothesis. I think it looks like this. And then let's make some assumptions on a mine plan that's going to prove that up. And then I bring it back as a scenario, right? Every scenario is all about data. So I would put in your base data, and then I would create a new scenario, which is easy to do. And then that new scenario would be all those assumptions that the geologist and engineer have come up with. And then I would run a number of permutations around that to quantify what the risk associated with that looks like. And then go back and make a business case and say, look, guys, we can generate this much more free cash flow, or, as an example, because I'm glad you said that, because it's part of the reason we built this is that there's a mystery between what decisions get made from the CFO. If she thinks it's like this or like that, she doesn't have a full context, or they don't have the full context, then it's about being able to take the brain power, which is really the geos and mining engineers, from understanding the situation and putting that into financial terms that people can say, all right, yep, I can do that. And we see it, like we have a processing manager that he's like, I want to know, I'm going to have a change in hardness, I'm going to have a change in recovery, I'm going to have this change, but I don't know if I should take this stockpile at this grade or that stockpile at that grade. So I want to be able to run these scenarios because I'm trying to deliver so many ounces by the end of the year. And I want to see how much I can, what are the impacts if I spend this capital, all sorts of scenarios. But the people that are responsible for it, just like you described, the mining engineer and the geologist, deserve to see the full impact of the company so that their case can be made and the decision can be made to allocate the capital or the investment. Very interesting question.
I've got a couple more questions. I'm not sure if you were running short on time, but otherwise I would.
No, I haven't taken questions.
Perfect. But I would just thank everyone for joining. I see people are already leaving, probably jumping onto other meetings. Thank you so much for joining, and please join us next week again. Got a really interesting talk from Freeport-McMoRan. Leah Walker is going to speak with her colleague about data analytics, AI, and how Freeport implemented that in their business side. So really cool talk coming up next week. Please make sure to sign up for that too. Okay, so let's go into the other questions. We got two more from Gowan. We'll maybe address one from, just look here, from Jared first. So I'm just going to read out the question here. In the context of continuous planning, software be connected with data being collected at the mine sites to provide real-time mine plan changes. So I guess the I guess
You
the
know,
question is if you integrate real-time data into your models directly.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We currently don't, but we definitely can. We are making connections through the enterprise system, so all their data. So we're working the cadence of monthly, but there's no limitation for us to go. Part of our CTO worked on trading systems, so the real-time impact is on our roadmap, and it's capable of doing it. So it's just slicing the data in shorter time intervals, right? So you need to, financial information is normally captured monthly, but operational data happens in real time. So the real question from that and this is where I believe AI would come into it, is like, I have all this information, so that's brilliant, but what decision do I need to make, and what decision should I make associated with that? So it's definitely there, and we do have data connectors and the ability to pull data in real time. So, or from systems, automated from systems. So I guess I'd be curious about the use case that you see for that.
I'm not sure if Jared is still in the chat though.
Yeah, I'm still here. The context of the reason why is because my dad he works in a petroleum company, and
Yep.
so the software that he helped set up for them was basically bringing in steam flood data from the fields, because it's a heavy oil field.
Right.
And so the company, it's only like 6 or 10 years old. But basically he came in and helped them set up their software to have real-time data coming in to the office. So they could get a head start on what needed, or if there were any problems. And if there's gaps in the data that he's generating for the company, he knows that a well is down or there's something wrong with it, and they can send people out to directly go fix it.
Right. So the corollary for that in mining would be in mobile equipment. Well, it's in plants too, within mobile equipment. So you're getting sensor data coming off the trucks, and that's used largely to deliver. It's to keep the throughput going, but it's also to detect, failures that can happen, so that they can, and it's also used for rerouting the truck. So there's different technologies that are used for that type of thing. But yes, it's important, and a lot of high performing mines have real-time data on the equipment, and they're using that for capturing, for maintenance, but also for productivity. In the case of Freeport, I think you'll probably hear next week, they have real-time data coming off every single truck in the whole system. So, and I'd be curious to hear how they're using it, but I would expect it's being used to do predictive maintenance, and also dispatching. Meaning you move it if so you don't have bunching of your trucks. So it'd be that kind of thing. But there are technologies associated with that. From a financial perspective, it goes back to the decision. I mean, some of the operating things are pretty obvious. Like if you've got truck capacity and you understand that you need to hit certain targets, you would then the rerouting makes sense. But if you're overproducing and you don't have the throughput to establish, to realize the value, then you may be just wasting money. Or you may not be. I mean, if it's a heap leach, you can just put it on the heap leach pad. But if there's other constraints within the system, then you want to make sure you understand what those are, so that you don't overproduce. A lot of companies can be overly focused on productivity, but they forget that there's limitations in the throughput. If you have to stockpile it, you have to rehandle it, or if you don't need it to go through the mill, that you add other costs that unintended consequences. You have other costs, and you want to avoid that from an operating view. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks, Tom. Maybe one question from Scott, and then if you still got time, we can circle back to Gowan with 2 more questions on inflation. Scott had a question if you're planning on, or if there's any capabilities for stochastic inputs in your software at the moment.
We do get that from customers, particularly when we're talking to the tech services teams. They do like the stochastic component to it. We've heard about it, but we haven't, the use case that's come up when you're in the financial context has not been as important, because there are other systems that can run stochastic. So what I would say to that is the way I would treat it is you'd be running cases in a separate model and then inputting those new cases into Revos to see the financial impact. So we do have it on a roadmap, but we haven't found the customer with the use case to be able that wants to invest to implement that. But we have the capability to do that. Most of our engineers that came to work for Revos asked the same question, but we haven't had that. We've gotten it from the technical teams and the customer, but not from the other teams that are investing in the application.
Not sure where.
Yes, it's an important thing, and it's on our roadmap.
Not sure where Scott was coming from, but maybe was it referring to geotechnical concerns? That was a question I had. I was geotechnical. I saw that in one of the slides, I think 25, you had geotechnical monitoring on there. Is that a big thing for companies to actually look into those models?
Well, for sure. But again, by the time we touch it and start working with it, it's been rendered into a mine plan. But the customer that we have, they had an earthquake. One of the customers we're working with now, that had an earthquake last summer, so they had some disruptions. But there's risk associated with the different geotechnical models that are that kind of precede the mine plan. So by the time we see the data, those things have been thought about in another piece of software before we get to it, and it's rendered into a plan. Like, this plan's got this much geotechnical risk. This plan has that much geotechnical risk. So we could evaluate both of them, but you'd have to give us some plans.
Sounds good.
But it's really important. You got people underneath the ground. You don't want them there when there's an earthquake necessarily.
Would not be good. So 2 more questions from Gowan, kind of related. I'll just find them. I was asking about for your NPV calculations, how do you estimate inflation out to infinity? And then relating to that, how do you model how do you estimate the uncertainty associated with inflation rate forecasts?
So the NPV, you have a discount. It's pretty basic. There's a discount rate that's used to calculate the NPV. So you'd have, the way you could treat that is, again, it's like different, what's the chance, what is a discount rate going to look like, and how is that, again, that would be, figured out what that is, and you could see what the variable is, but that's how you would address that. Inflation. So, those are big strategic questions. So, like, what's the inflation going to be like? So what does that mean for my oil price? And what's that going to be for the commodity price? Are these things, are they all linked together? Are they moving at the same rates? Are they moving at different rates? So it's that big picture view of what decision are you making? And then how do you quantify the risk? So if everything is moving the same way, maybe it's not quite so much, but it could be like, if your gold price is going up at 10%, but your fuel price is going up at 20%, well, that probably wouldn't be too good. But we can do that now. I showed you the fuel and the gold, revenue price, the gold price. So what other inflations would be there? If you're really trying to understand this, you unpack it and say, like, I'm in a country where there's high inflation of labor. So I want to, in my labor model, I want to have, an annual increase of, X%. In my fuel, my commodity prices are pretty stable. So my fuel price is only going to increase by 2 or 3%. So let's adjust that. My power prices are pretty stable, but so I'd set it up that way. And then I look at my commodity price, and we don't forecast the price of gold. There are companies that provide guidance to that, but the mining companies figure that out. So the way you would use Revos for that is you would develop those assumptions on the inputs and then run the scenario and see the impact. It's very powerful. The thing is, you can get those answers very quickly, right? So the point of getting an answer quickly allows you to think about other things and then look at those impacts as well as you layer through it. So it's an extension, hopefully it's an extension of your mind.
Thank you, Tom. I think that's all the questions we had. If this,
Tom, I have one more question. Luke, can you, if you have the mine plans for each site, can you do a optimization of your global production, given the input from individual mines, and you say you want to produce 1 million ounces per year, and tell me where should I produce that?
We can do it. We can do that. We can answer that question. We don't automatically calculate that, but it kind of gets to capital allocation, but you're trying to understand that. But the way we would do it is you create the different cases of, and you're, solving for, I'm trying to hit 1 million ounces, and I'm trying to understand where, which is it going to look better for. So we probably would do it initially on a site-by-site basis, and then we pull it into the consolidated application that would tell us what the result was. And then you would go back. So so it would be manual initially. We'd have to build, some capability to do that, but we would be able to help that. I think that's because you would say, this one's producing, you would be solving for 1 million ounces, but you'd be solving also for a certain capital component, and you'd be solving for an ASIC target, right? Or margin target.
Yeah, I mean, those production rates would also define what type of capacities you have to purchase and put in place.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, we do, so basically it's in a bigger ecosystem, you've got 6 mines or 7 mines, whatever it is, and you're trying to look at the constraints associated with that set of properties. So you would be looking at them holistically all as one, and then you would say, you're going to start pulling levers to see what the impact is. You would have to be pulling the levers to do it with different mine plans, right? So you could put in different, I want 4 plants from this side, I want 5 plants from that side, I want these 6 plants from the other one. And then you'd be running the scenarios against the combination of plans. I think that's how I would think about it. Or are you thinking it's something that would be automated, or are you thinking?
Yeah, automated, yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly something, if there's an interest in that, I'd like to explore it further.
Okay.
It might be something we could collaborate on, or if there's a specific use case, we'd like to talk more about it. I think it's an important thing when you look at the corporate view of the world, because again, they're trying to hit these targets from an ASIC perspective, an ounce perspective, but it would be very interesting to say to select to select the right combination of plans.
Right.
That would be very interesting. I can think of a place like the Valley Gold where you've got different parameters associated with that. You have different cost structures associated with each of the operations, and you have different processing techniques that are for certain ores. But that would be something I'd be very interested in talking more about.
Right, right.
Yeah.
They are driven by the global targets of production, ounces production, and they want to know how to allocate that optimally.
Okay.
To individual mine sites, and all the mine sites have their own mine plans.
Right.
And sequences, and you want to know how fast to deplete one mine versus the other one, and given those production targets.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely would like to explore that further. I don't know what your schedule is like.
In the new language, they call it the new AI concept. right?
Right.
You would have all the data already inputted
Right.
into your system. And now determine what's the best way to exploit your deposits next 10 years. And identify where you need to allocate the capital to achieve your target.
Okay.
We can talk about this, Tom.
Yeah, that would be great. I would enjoy that. That would be
Yeah.
great. Yeah, I would be really, that would be very, that's kind of breakthrough, right? From a capital allocation and from running a global business.
Strategy, yeah.
Yeah, strategy. Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. So I'll reach out to you for a deeper discussion on that.
Okay, sounds
Yeah.
good.
I think we could also help with the project that we kicked out that Doug was talking about last week.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, we could be the engine that helps drive that. Would be an interesting thing too. So.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Great
All right.
talk. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
Yeah.
Padre.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you so much, Tom.